Hey everybody. This is a section from Marcel van der Linden's Western Marxism and the Soviet Union. The piece, this is about the theory of the degenerated worker state, not as formulated by Trotsky, but in a later period. Not initially after Trotsky's death, but later. So, this, for instance, to explain, this section is from the chapter 5 of the book, from the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union to the repression of the, quote, Prague Spring, end quote, 1956 to 68. So, it's about the theory of the degenerated worker state in that period, between 56 and 68. The refusal to re-examine or revise any essential aspect of Trotsky's theory of the, quote, degenerated workers' state, end quote, had typified the publication of Trotsky's followers about actually existing socialism. As noted in the previous chapter, the Fourth International after World War II disconnected the time factor that Trotsky built into his theory, the postulate of the limited duration of the Stalinist phenomenon. Subsequently, the Trotskyists considered it their most important theoretical task to discover in all new developments a confirmation of the old theory. At the Fifth World Congress of the Fourth International in 1957, i.e. shortly after the Polish and Hungarian revolts and the 20th Congress of the CPSU, Communist Party of the Soviet Union, it was declared that the dramatic developments in the USSR, the buffer states, and the Western Communist parties had totally proved the correctness of Trotskyist analysis. With evident self-satisfaction, it was noted that the Fourth International was the only tendency in the labor movement which had foreseen the evolution of Stalinism and correctly interpreted it. See, instance, I guess it's the manifesto of the Fourth International from, Fourth International, 1958. So that would be the Decline and Fall of Stalinism, resolution adopted by the Fifth World Congress, 1958. Noteworthy especially is the report which Mandel presented together with the relevant resolution, referring to Trotsky's old 1939 alternative, quote, either restoration of capitalism or reestablishment of Soviet democracy, end quote. Mandel considered that now, in 1957, this alternative no longer applied in the same way. Quote, the two terms of this alternative were conceived in close connection with the development of the relationship of forces on the world scale, ... Two terms of an alternative do not mean two possibilities of simultaneous solutions. When Trotsky formulated his perspective for the first time in a precise way, that is, after Hitler's victory in 1933, he was obliged to place a question mark over the future dynamics of the relationship of forces on a world scale. Would revolution advance again, or would it go on being defeated everywhere in the world? No one could seriously answer this question in 1935. But towards the end of the Second World War, with the victory of the Yugoslav Revolution, the victory of the Chinese Revolution, and the spread of the Colonial Revolution, with the enormous progress of the Soviet economy, it became clear that the relationship of forces was turning in favor of revolution on the world scale, end quote. So international capitalism was seriously weakened, which meant that one of Trotsky's alternatives, counter-revolution, did not seem very realistic anymore. The other possibility seemed more realistic. Quote, the revolutionary opening has come about in the East, ... The working class has given up its passive attitude. The working class no longer, quote, tolerates, end quote, the dishonest watchman. On the contrary, the working class hounds him more and more, waging war on the field of factories and on that of principles, forcing him to put aside his insolence and preparing to overthrow his power, end quote. Germain, 1958. That's from if you didn't know who Ernest Germain was, that's Ernest Mandel's nom de guerre, I guess you'd say. The piece is called Prospects and Dynamics of the Political Revolution Against the Bureaucracy. This prediction was in fact not realized. The pretense of the Trotskyist current, that it was the only one to be able to see through the crisis of Stalinism totally, turned out to be without justification. This perhaps explains why the Trotskyist theoreticians for a long time afterwards let Trotsky's alternative rest. Having initially positioned himself primarily as a critic of rival theories, Mandel also gained prominence from around 1960 as the most important, quote, modernizer, end quote, of the theory of the degenerated worker state. From the numerous writings in which Mandel devoted attention to the analysis of Soviet society, I will take one, his monumental Marxist economic theory, completed in 1960 and first published in 1962, in which an important chapter advanced a, quote, orthodox, end quote, defense of the theory of the, quote, degenerated workers' state, end quote. In this work, Mandel elaborated on Trotsky's theory beyond the contradiction of the non-capitalist mode of production and the bourgeois distribution norms. There were also contradictions. Thus, while the tense relationship between production and distribution was a defining feature of all societies in transition from capitalism and socialism, the Soviet Union featured specific contradictions arising from the bureaucratic grip on the state and the economy. These additional contradictions fell into three groups. First, contradictions arising from the malformed relationship between the development of industry and the decline or stagnation of agriculture. Their origin lay in the fact that industrialization had begun too late, while the integral collectivization of agriculture had occurred too early, so that an insufficient technical and social basis existed for such a revolution in agriculture. Second, contradictions arising from the fact that the material interest of the bureaucracy was the real driving force of the economy. Quote, the normal vehicle of socialist planning and accumulation is consciousness on the part of the industrial producers. Quote, the normal vehicle of socialist planning and accumulation is consciousness on the part of the individual producers that they're defending their own interest, together with their creative initiative. But facts must confirm theory. Every increase in productive effort must be immediately reflected in an increase in consumption by the masses. When this driving force is largely absent, because the excessive rate of accumulation imposes excessive sacrifices on the producers, the bureaucracy becomes the regulator-in-chief director of accumulation. It thereby acquires substantial consumer privileges in money, housing, luxuries, and other scarce consumer goods, end quote, etc. Other scarce consumer goods, etc., end quote. Mandel. The bureaucrats were stimulated to expand production continuously through fear of being purged and the close correlation between their own position and enterprise profits. Third, contradictions arising from bureaucratic administration as such. Quote, the contradiction between the planned character of the Soviet economy and the personal interests of the bureaucrats, considered as the chief driving force for the fulfillment of the plan, is the principal contradiction introduced into the Soviet economy as a result of its specifically bureaucratic management. The effects combine with two other contradictions resulting from this bureaucratic management. The contradiction between the high level of development of the productive forces and the scarcity of consumer goods on the one side, and contradiction between the needs of integral planning and the harm done by bureaucratic hypercentralization. End quote. Mandel. The end.